So, fun fact. As of August of this year, I am officially the third longest serving pastor of this church. I even have my portrait up in the lounge next to Reverend Cabbage, who was pastor here for 15 years. That was actually not a call for applause, but thank you. Next to Reverend Cabbage, who was here for 15 years, and Reverend Campbell, who was pastor here for 30 years. Anyway, the other day I thought to myself, there are a few Bible stories that you've always looked forward to preaching on, but haven't had the opportunity to yet for whatever reason. There's some pretty good Bible stories that aren't in the lectionary, the 3-year cycle of Bible readings that many churches follow. For that matter, there's some pretty good Bible stories that aren't in the Bible. Maybe after 6 years, you can find a way to share those stories. They're not going to pop up otherwise. So today I wanted to share the story of Susanna and the elders, which is also the debut appearance of the prophet Daniel, as he publicly and authoritatively speaks for God for the first time. There is kind of a catch, though. When I said there's some pretty good Bible stories that aren't in the Bible, I did not misspeak. The chapter of the book of Daniel that tells this story isn't always in the Bible. If you pick up a Catholic or an Orthodox Bible, you'll find Susanna there. But if you pick up a Protestant Bible, you won't. There are various reasons why books didn't make it into the Bible in the first place or were later removed during the Protestant Reformation. It's worth pointing out, I think, that the books and passages that Protestants took out of our Bible are ones that were never in the official Jewish canon either. It's often because those books don't start appearing until way after the events that they're describing. If someone today published a book about a general in the American Revolutionary War, but no one had ever heard of him, and there wasn't much evidence, if any, that he'd ever existed in the first place. That isn't really how history works. Or imagine if you were reading an article about Shakespeare and it mentioned something that happened while the bard was typing a script instead of writing it. You might be a little skeptical of where the article's author was getting their information from, or at least skeptical of the editor. So the story of Susanna and the elders isn't in our Bible and wasn't based on any historical events in the life of Daniel the prophet. You might now be wondering, Pastor Leia, if the story's made up, then why is it important if it's not even in the Bible, and why should I care? And those would be completely valid questions, which is why the apocryphal story of Susanna and the elders is not something I've ever preached on before. However, even though it was made up as a much later addition to the book of Daniel, it's still been a popular story for almost 2,000 years. And it definitely reflects on the values and beliefs of early Christians in the 2nd century AD when it was written. And that can help us understand the faith of those early Christians, and maybe even help us understand some of the choices that they made. Anyway, it's really up to you whether this story is worth considering as a religious text, or to what degree. You can dismiss it as fan fiction if you want to, valid, or bad history, or a fable, or irrelevant, or whatever. But it's a really good story with a really good message. So let's dive in. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful woman named Susanna. The story literally refers to her beauty 4 different times. Susanna was kind and gracious, and she came from a good family, and her husband was wealthy and well-respected, and she lived her life by what she had learned from scriptures. She was faithful and morally upstanding and believed in God and was worthy of her good reputation in her community. All of that is in the story too, but first, the author has to make sure we understand that Susanna was pretty. Thanks, I hate it. Next, the story tells us that Susanna's husband, Joachim, was very rich and had a fine garden adjoining his house. The people used to come to him because he was the most honored of them all. In this community, a couple of elders would be appointed to serve as judges every year. These men were frequently at Joachim's house, and all who had a case to be tried came to them there. That would be the business of the morning, and then people would leave around noon. After they left, Susanna would often clear her mind by taking a walk in her garden. And every time that she went for a little garden stroll, the two elders would creep on her as they were wrapping up their legal business for the day and heading home. They were both so overcome with lust for Susanna that they turned their eyes away from looking to heaven and forgot about the part where they were supposed to, be good judges and administer justice and all of that. They were keeping it to themselves for now, but both of them were very much creeping on Susanna, intensely, inappropriately, every day. There is no justifying that level of stalking and objectification, but creeper's gonna creep, I guess. But then one day it all came to a head. The two elders, otherwise known as absolute creeps, they don't have names in the text, so they're creeps, said to each other something like, "Hey dude, I'm heading off for lunch now at my house where I live and where I eat lunch, because that is definitely for sure where I am going, and I'm totally not going to stick around to creep on Susanna even though she's super hot, because that would be rude to Joachim or whatever, which is why I'd never do anything like that. Yep, home for lunch, that's where I'm headed." Obviously I'm paraphrasing here for comedic effect, because they really don't deserve the dignity of "let us go home, for it is time for lunch," as the NRSV very calmly translates it. I mean, we can all agree it's pretty messed up to sneak around and hide so you can watch someone from behind a bush or whatever. Anyway, the two creepy elders go home and have lunch. Just kidding, they stuck around to spy on Susanna. But then, because they were both so intently focused on watching someone who didn't know she was being watched, that they managed to literally run into each other. At first, they tried to make excuses of, "Oh, I was just looking for my keys that I must have dropped around here somewhere. That's why I haven't gone home yet." But then they admitted to each other that really they were just there to spy on Susanna because they were just so overcome with lust for her, which justifies nothing, but they clearly hadn't been thinking with their judge brains for a while. So now the two elders/creepers are joining forces, sharing what they've found out about Susanna's daily schedule so that they can figure out the best time to catch her alone. A few days pass, and the two men are hiding in Susanna's garden, as they've each been doing for a while now. But this day is not like the other days. It's a hot afternoon, and they hear Susanna asking her two maids to bring her olive oil and ointments and then shut the doors to the garden so that she can bathe in the pond in privacy. The maids do that and then go into the house, not realizing that there are two men hiding in the garden, because why would they have expected anyone to be trespassing on private property to watch a woman undress? So now the garden doors are shut and the maids have left, and Susanna has taken her clothes off so that she can take a dip in a cool pond on a hot day in her own garden. And then the two elders got up and ran to her. They said, "Look, the garden doors are shut and no one can see us. We are burning with desire for you, so give your consent and lie with us. If you refuse, we will testify against you that a young man was with you, and this was why you sent your maids away." In other words, here's the deal. Either you can have sex with us and it can be our little secret, or we can tell everybody that we just so happened to catch you committing adultery, and BTW, the punishment for adultery is execution. So, not great. Susanna obviously doesn't love either option, but she tells them that she would rather keep her integrity, even if it means her death. She will not base the rest of her life on a lie, and let the cruelty of these men win. And then she cries out for help, but unfortunately these two monsters are quick-thinking and effective problem solvers, which was probably why they had been asked to be judges in the first place, even if they've actually been doing a pretty bad job of it. So one of the men runs to open the garden doors, and they claim that while they were walking in the garden, they just so happened to witness Susanna send her maids away, and then they saw a young man come out of hiding. The two jerk hats, I'm getting creative here rather than needing to go back and bleep out the audio after the fact, came out from the corner of the garden where they witnessed Susanna in the act of adultery, and they tried to detain the young man, but he was strong. Yeah, he was too strong for them, and he got away. So then they seized Susanna, and they demanded that she tell them who the young man was, but she wouldn't tell them. So the men swear and testify that their story is the truth. And because they're elders and judges and allegedly upright community leaders, the assembly believes them, and Susanna is condemned to death. Then Susanna cried out with a loud voice and said, "O eternal God, you know what is secret, and you are aware of all things before they come to be. You know that these men have given false evidence against me. And now I am to die, though I have done none of the wicked things that they have charged against me." The Lord heard her cry. So now Susanna is being led off towards her death. And this is where the prophet Daniel comes in, shouting, "I want no part in shedding this woman's blood." The assembly all stops and looks at him and asks him what he means. Because obviously the word of a single man is serious business. But when Susanna defended herself and pointed out that she's always been a faithful wife and a devoted follower of God, that clearly wasn't worth considering because she's a woman. Smash the patriarchy. Oh, something in my throat there. I should have my cup of water up here. Anyway, Daniel demands a retrial. "Are you such fools, O Israelites, as to condemn a daughter of Israel without examination and without learning the facts? Return to court, for these men have given false evidence against her." Daniel says that he wants to speak to the two so-called judges separately. So he summons the first man, and because Daniel has absolutely no chill, he says to the first man, "You old relic of wicked days, your sins have now come home, which you have committed in the past, pronouncing unjust judgments, condemning the innocent and acquitting the guilty, though the Lord has said, you shall not put an innocent and righteous person to death. Now then, if you really saw this woman, tell me this, under what tree did you witness them being intimate with each other?" The first man says it was a mastic tree. Says Daniel. Then Daniel summons the second man, and he has even less chill. He says to the second man, "You offspring of Canaan and not of Judah, beauty has beguiled you, and lust has perverted your heart. This is how you have been treating the daughters of Israel, and they were intimate with you through fear. But a daughter of Judah would not tolerate your wickedness. Now then tell me, under which tree did you catch them being intimate with each other?" The second man says it was an evergreen oak. "Right," Daniel says. Obviously, the stories of these two lascivious jerk-hats don't match up. Of course they don't. They're both lying. So Susanna is proven innocent of all charges and is saved from execution. Though there is still an execution that happens that day, well, two really, the two elders receive the exact fate they had so happily condemned Susanna to after their attempts at assault and blackmail were unsuccessful. Susanna's family praises God. Daniel becomes well known for his wisdom and discernment. Justice won out that day. Susanna herself probably spends the rest of her life struggling to trust her friends and neighbors who had so quickly sentenced her to death for a crime that they knew was out of character for her. But other than that, everyone lives happily ever after, and Susanna becomes known as biblical heroine who is full of integrity and courage, willing to die for the sake of truth and for what is right. Imagine hearing the story of Susanna when your Christian faith is still illegal, and you yourself risk execution if you are caught out and you refuse to live a lie. The stakes wouldn't feel very hypothetical if they were the same stakes that you faced every day. Her story might give you hope that if you were given the choice of recanting your faith or being killed, maybe you could have Susanna's courage. Imagine hearing the story of Susanna when your entire gender is often dismissed or silenced. Her story might give you hope that someday you will be vindicated too, and your voice will be heard. Imagine hearing the story of Susanna when you are drowning in corrupt politicians and governments, and it feels like your peers would sell their souls if it meant they could grab a little more control or power. Her story might give you hope that someday those peers might be called out and might even choose to change their ways and do better in the future. Imagine hearing the story of Susanna when you were surrounded by a culture of conspiracies and devil's advocates and people who absolutely refuse to accept empirical facts. Her story might give you hope that people could be brought to their senses before it was too late. Imagine hearing the story of Susanna when you are faced with two terrible choices and you know that whatever path you choose, you know that you will still lose. Her story might give you the courage to choose what is right instead of what might at first seem to be easier. Imagine hearing the story of Susanna when you feel like you don't matter, like your voice doesn't matter, like your life doesn't matter. Her story might give you hope that a single voice speaking up for the truth might be able to make a real difference. Imagine hearing the story of Susanna when your society treats you as the property of your father or husband, when your life and body could be given or sold or traded away. Her story might give you hope that you could have some kind of agency and control over your own life and your own body. Imagine hearing the story of Susanna when too many of your friends and sisters have lived through assaults and attacks and violence and abuse at the hands of men. When multiple people at your dinner table can say in perfect unison, "Yes, I have experienced that." When a classmate tries to argue that these statistics are exaggerated. When your trauma becomes a punchline, if it's ever even acknowledged at all. Her story might give you hope that sometimes, just sometimes, there can be justice in this world. There are rapists in the Bible who face no justice and no punishment and are even regarded as heroes despite what they've done. But this time there is justice and there is punishment, and the offenders are regarded as the slime balls that they are. That's a story that needs to be told, a story that needs to be heard. And yes, the story of Susanna was written generations after the rest of the book of Daniel. And yes, it is just a fable. And yes, it's not found in Jewish scripture. And yes, the only ancient copies are in Greek and never in Hebrew. And yes, it's not a story printed in standard Protestant Bibles. And yes, it's a story that some of you have never heard before. But the fact that this story is a part of our faith tradition, the fact that it's always been popular in art, the fact that it's still a story that is being passed down, that fact in and of itself gives me hope that there are people who care about our bodies, who care about our agency, who care about our demand for justice. There are people who will defend those who have been brushed aside, talked over, denied their day in court. There are people who want others to be held accountable. There are people who will speak up. There are people who will use their power to make a difference. There are people who will call others out when they say things that are hurtful and cruel and wrong and dangerous. So that's the story of Susanna and the elders. I hope you can see why it's a story that I've always felt needs to be preached, and maybe also why it's a story that I wouldn't necessarily have felt comfortable sharing as a new pastor. Thank you for trusting me, even when I share stories that aren't in our Bible. Thank you for listening to me pouring my heart out and barely keeping it together. Thank you for understanding that some stories need to be shared, even though parts of those stories make us feel really uncomfortable. Thank you for being people that I can trust with some of the stories that are hard for me to share. Thank you for being an essential part of my own story. Thank you for giving me the honor of being your pastor and sharing your lives with me. And while I'm at it, thank you to Diane for framing the new portrait that Ken just hung up in the lounge on Thursday. And thank you to the 2 young artists who created the truly delightful portraits of me that are now hanging in the hallway across from the kitchen. Thank you. May we all have the faith and the integrity and the courage to live like Susanna. And may we continue to be inspired by the stories of faith that we have shared from generation to generation, the stories that we will keep telling and keep living, even when they break our hearts, until we fall down before God's throne and there is justice in the universe. Amen.